Data protection and privacy teams are under more pressure than ever with new laws, AI oversight, data breaches, and the constant expectation to do more with fewer resources.
That's why TrustArc built a modern privacy and data protection management platform powered by Arc Intelligence. It unifies your tools, automates the work that slows you down, and surfaces what matters most right when you need it.
From guided quick actions to our intelligent assistant, Ask Arc, you get credible, contextual answers backed by expert research, not generic AI guesses.
Finally, privacy that works the way privacy pros work.
Learn how TrustArc helps teams move faster with confidence at trustarc.com/serious-privacy. That's trustarc.com/serious-privacy.
You're listening to Serious Privacy by TrustArc. Please welcome our hosts, Paul Breitbarth and Kay Royal.
Welcome to Serious Privacy, and thank you for joining us. Today, my co-host, Paul Breitbarth, is out, and so we are welcoming in a new co-host. You've heard from him before, Ralph O'Brien. And this is one of our Weeks in Privacy sessions. So this is going to be just Ralph and myself shooting the breeze. And I'll warn you, without Paul here, there's no rules. There are no rules. So here we go. My name is Kay Royal.
And I'm Ralph O'Brien.
And welcome to Serious Privacy. So, Ralph, we actually just started talking before we even started the recording about what we wanted to talk about. And I realized we should just stop talking about what we want to talk about and talk about it.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, let's go. I mean, there's always plenty to talk about.
Let's just make it happen. Okay, we have to do the unexpected question first, which, by the way, this is always an unexpected question. Okay, I'm just going to go to the one that opened up. What was your last great meal? And that is MEAL. Everybody laughs at how I say it.
My last great meal. Wow. Let me think about that for a moment. I'd love to say it was something fancy and that I'd been to a beautiful, wonderful restaurant. But sadly, at the moment, this being in the COVID-19, we don't get out a lot. So, yeah, I did have a very good piece of steak at the weekend. I managed to disappear down to the butcher's and bring in quite a large piece of steak. And apologies to any vegans or vegetarians out there, but it was mighty good, mighty fine.
I make no apologies. I grew up in the South. We had our own beef cattle. But, funny enough, as you say that, I will say that I really don't eat a lot of meat. And as soft as my heart is for that environment, you would think I would go completely vegetarian or vegan. But gluten-free vegan is probably the most difficult diet in the world to try to do. So actually, when I do eat meat, I usually have a really good steak a couple of times a year. Honestly, not much more often than that. So my last great meal, I am going to say, was probably when my mom was visiting. As much as I kind of hate Southern cooking because I tend to gain a lot of weight during COVID anyway, my mom was here a year ago. She lives in Mississippi. And when she's here, she does Southern cooking. And she has learned to modify it to accommodate gluten-free. But, my mom is like the best cook ever. So I'm trying to bring to mind any particular meal she made while she was here. But growing up, my favorite meal that I always and only got on my birthday was chicken and dumplings. And my mom has learned how to make some really good gluten-free dumplings and gluten-free gravy, and it's fantastic.
Well, you know what?
So, and I miss my mom.
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to say exactly the same thing, actually. I don't often talk about family and friends, but I grew up in a rural farming community. I grew up in a rural farming community where it was all, roasts and pies. And, I'm actually a child of divorce. Yep. So growing up, it was me and my mother who taught me how to cook and clean. And, I can crochet better than I can do DIY, right? So
no gender roles when you're raised by a single parent, right?
Yeah.
No gender roles.
Totally. So,
it's fantastic.
Much love to her.
Same thing.
Much love to her.
Thank you. And you're much, much love to both of our moms, single moms who look at the kids they raise. They probably hang their head in shame. We'll have to make sure they hear part of this podcast so they know how much we really love and respect them. So, okay, let's move on to the things that we want to talk about, because we were asking what's hot right now that we want to talk about. We first started talking about Brexit. We also mentioned facial recognition, and I think there was one other that was starting to ping on us a little bit. But let's start with Brexit, because I'm not really sure that everyone that listens understands the implications of the UK separating from EU, although we've had a year transition, and the fact that there are new laws. And to comply with UK and the EU, you now have to have 2 sets of representatives and 2 DPOs and 2 everything. You got to have border crossing mechanisms, which is a whole nother topic. So what's your thought on it? You're in the UK, right?
Yeah, totally correct. I'm just north of London myself. Brexit is the gift that keeps on giving. You know, let's face it, we could make podcasts from now until the end of time talking about Brexit. I have to put my hand on my heart and say that I'm actually a Remoaner myself. I'm a Remoaner, which means that, you know, I was against it from the start, but I guess we are where we are.
I was going to say, I have no clue what that means.
a Remainer, but the Brexiteers would call us a Remoaner. But yeah, you're totally right. The UK has left the EU, and that places UK and EU organizations with a whole nother little headache. I mean, it's fascinating now that we're separated. One of the things they did agree in the trade deal between the 11th hour, 24th of December trade deal between the EU and the UK was actually to allow a 3-month extension for data transfers. So whilst everyone was really concerned it was going to be an 11th hour, oh my God, we're no longer adequate, we can't transfer data to the EU or the EU to us, one of the things they did is sort of pending an adequacy decision, give us a 3-month, things can carry on as normal for 3 months while Europe sits on, you know, with a proverbial sword of Damocles hanging above the UK's head in terms of data transfers. So, you know, we have a 3-month window. However, what did change on the 1st of January is we now have what we call the UK GDPR. So for data processed before the 31st of December 2020, the data was covered by the EU GDPR. And for data after the 31st of December, the 1st of January, it's now covered by the UK GDPR. And the UK GDPR, and you can find it.
Okay, hold on. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about that. So this is kind of like if you revise your privacy notice, the revision only applies to data moving forward. All the data moving back, you have to put under the provisions you collected it. I had not considered that the data before Brexit would still apply to regular GDPR and the data after Brexit would fall under UKG. I guess I don't guess I really thought about it.
Yeah, they're calling it frozen GDPR.
It makes perfect sense, of course, but
they call it the frozen GDPR. Yeah, which is a really interesting point of view because, of course, if the EU changes the GDPR, then the data before the 31st of December will still be subject to what was the EU law at the time.
Let it go. Let it go.
Yeah, I know. It's crazy. But so if you really want to know the state of the UK law, and you're going to love this, this is a mouthful. The state of the UK law at the moment is called the UK GDPR, which is the EU GDPR as amended by the Data Protection Act 2018, as amended by the Data Protection and Electronic Communication Regulations, brackets, EU Withdrawal Amendments, brackets, Regulations 2019, as amended by the EU, by the Data Protection and Privacy Electronic Communication Regulations, brackets, EU Withdrawal Amendments, close brackets,
I'm exhausted.
Regulations 2020. There you go, done. That is the name of the current data protection law in the UK. So it's the GDPR as amended by the Data Protection Act, as amended by 2 sets of withdrawal regulations.
Oh my goodness. Now I have to say, TrustArc has already gone through and cross-mapped both of them, of course, and cross-mapping them into the TrustArc framework which when this is deployed externally, it's going to be fantastic because our goal is to map all of the laws of the world into it. And of course, we have our priorities. POPI is our in this first set that we plan to have. And so we've mapped the GDPR against the UK GDPR. And I have to tell you, one point that irritates me is there is no 41.3.
Correct.
It's omitted. There's a 41.2 and a 41.4, but 41.3, it's not reserved, it's omitted. So you skip numbers. And so for these anal retentive attorneys who like things to be orderly, it's very irritating. But on the other hand, had they omitted it and then changed the numbering between the two, that would have irritated me as well. So
the difficulty is you can't read the GDPR alone anymore. You've got to read it alongside the UK Data Protection Act 2018. And that comes in 5 parts. To completely
understand it.
Yeah. That comes in 5 different parts. And actually, so the UK Data Protection Act 2018 has got part 2, which, if you like, is the amendments to the GDPR. It's got a part 3, which is law enforcement processing. It's got a part 4, which is security services processing. And then it's got a part 5, which is all the powers of the regulator and the information commissioner. So we've actually got 3 separate privacy regimes under the same law here in the UK. We've got the UK GDPR, then we've got a privacy law for law enforcement, and a privacy law for the national security services.
Oh, so interesting.
Yeah. All under the Data Protection Act 2018. It's got different parts that refer to each. I mean, the principles are largely the same, but of course there are different exemptions and different, standards of tests, which makes it fascinating.
Historically, the UK has been a fantastic partner to the United States, and so I don't imagine they're going to do a lot that we wouldn't like. We've always worked very well together. It's just trying to get past Schrems 2 and all the border transfers and everything, which, as we mentioned with Helen Dixon last week, which, by the way, congratulations for being on season 2 following Helen Dixon there.
Hard act to follow. I mean, she was amazing.
Right. But we discussed the fact that Christopher Hoff has been appointed to the Commerce Department to lead the negotiations for the new Shield. And you and I have a little conversation going back and forth on Twitter about what are we going to call the new one. Now, I don't know if you liked my last suggestion, which was, what was it? Peer totem locomotor, which is the spell that McGonagall used to activate the guards around the hall in the last one. I thought you might get that, but
well, yeah, no. I'm a Potter fan as much as anyone, but yeah, I mean, I think we've been through Marvel Avengers with Captain America raising his mighty shield, and we've gone
wall around the globe, which was Ultron something and Vision.
I like the Ultron initiative. It sounds suitably ominous, right? I mean, what's really interesting actually when we look at the UK is it is now culturally we share a language and entertainment with the US. Now that we are away from the EU for all intents and purposes, the idea is to free us up to be a little bit more commercial, a little bit free of EU red tape was the idea. But we find ourselves between a rock and a hard place in that we are geographically close to the EU. We share 99% of our legislative framework. If we wanted to get closer to the US and the more commercial model in the US, we'd then find difficulties in data transfers under Schrems 2 that the US would find. I mean, we're not guaranteed an adequacy decision within 3 months.
Right.
We've got a law here called RIPA, the Regulation of Investory Powers Act, which has been much criticized by surveillance organizations. People like Big Brother Watch and Privacy International have taken the UK government to court for its use of RIPA for mass surveillance, much the same as the US.
What most people don't realize is even though Schrems 2 focused on the US surveillance powers and what we do, the U.S. is not the only or the worst country in the world with government surveillance. It's just we happen to have the really big, really cool tech companies.
You happen to have the really big, really cool tech companies. You had, of course, the Snowden event.
We're not talking about
that. Depending on your views of that really raised it in public consciousness. And I think it's all snowballed from there. But yeah, I think if you look at any Western organization, any Western government, I think the UK has escaped further scrutiny because it was part of the club. And actually, the event of leaving that club will now mean that things that might have avoided scrutiny will now be put under scrutiny.
Right.
And I
okay,
don't think
got a question for you. Basic question. Is the UK still considered part of the European continent because it's an island?
Yes.
Okay.
There's a couple of interesting wrinkles. So we're still part of Europe. We're just no longer part of the economic and political union. We're now no longer part of the EU. Yeah. But we're still part of the continent. We're still Europeans, for want of a better word. But yes, psychologically, that water is a barrier. Let's face it.
Right,
Psychologically, that water is a barrier. But Ireland is separated by two sets of water and has only got a geographical connection with the UK. So, but they're still in. So it's a really interesting area, especially when you look at the Northern Ireland border and the political situation there. It becomes fascinating to me. As you'll happen to know my surname's O'Brien, therefore it's not a great surprise to find out where my ancestry lies. And I've always considered myself a citizen of the world, let alone Europe. A couple of other interesting little wrinkles. The UK is still part of the Council of Europe.
I hadn't thought about that.
Now, for those people who don't know, the Council of Europe is a very separate organization from the EU. It's an international organization of 47 countries, as opposed to the EU, which is an economic political union of 27 countries. So the Council of Europe actually means that the UK is signed up to things like the European Convention on Human Rights, Convention 108, and we're still subject to the jurisprudence of the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, even though we're no longer subject to the jurisprudence of the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg.
Ooh.
So we've left the EU.
These are some of the nuances that I haven't even considered, which is no surprise to anyone because I'm so bad at even geography. I call it geometry. But it's that I had not considered the complexities there. But of course, people in the United Kingdom, of course, are very aware of those issues. I'm pretty sure the average person on the street are.
Yeah, the average person on the street might not be. If you're a human rights lawyer, you're very aware of it. We're still subject. But, the average person on the street probably wouldn't recognize the difference between Council of Europe and the European Union. In fact, whenever I deliver training courses to new privacy professionals, we kind of start with the history and we go through the difference between the EU and the Council of Europe. But not a lot of people know that. Not a lot of people know that, and a lot of people even realize.
Now I don't feel so stupid.
Yeah, not a lot of people here know that. In fact, not a lot of Europeans. When I teach, for the IAPP and I teach like the CIPE, for example.
Right.
And I talk to people about how the EU works and how you get a regulation passed. And it's amazing the amount of Europeans that aren't aware. They have no clue about their own constitutional makeup, which is fantastic.
I'm okay with that because here in the United States, of course, over Facebook, we've had so many people that are now medical experts, and then they went to being constitutional experts. And it's funny how the opinions switch back and forth about where your First Amendment right for freedom of speech fits in, depending on what side of the issue you're on. And then when you go to another issue, your opinion switches to the other side. So trust me, I kind of get it because people here in the United States really don't fully understand our constitutional rights either. So that makes a lot of sense, which, by the way, my family is descended from British royalty.
Hence the name?
Directly. We can... No, hence the name Fairchild.
Okay.
I come from the Fairchild lineage, which were illegitimate sons of a sitting king who were targeted for assassination because they were recognized as in the line for the throne. And so supporters got the two children out. And I think the king was something the fair. I have it in a documented book, something. So when they brought them to the United States, one went north, one went south, and they were called Fairchild.
Wonderful. It's funny enough, being an O'Brien doesn't actually necessarily mean you've got a direct line of connection to the High King of Ireland, Brian Boru, in the 10th century. I mean,
you should.
If you were the cook in the castle, you were of Brian. You were of the clan O'Brien.
Yeah.
So it doesn't necessarily mean bloodline. There's a lot of O'Briens out there. We were very prolific. It's the Catholic background.
So it's kind of cool, which is interesting nowadays with everybody doing genetic testing and finding new family members.
Yeah, I mean, we've had some very interesting genetic testing cases here. People who have gone and had their genetic testing done, and found out that their siblings are only 50% genetically related, or
they're not related to their father, or things along that line. So for some people, I guess it's good, and some it's not.
Well, exactly.
But it's interesting because I'm also part Native American and not a member of the tribe. And in trying to go back and be able to prove lineage, which I'm very proud of being part Choctaw. But in doing research, and I don't know this has changed, but in doing research, it turns out that a lot of Native Americans do not participate in this type of sampling. And so the records with all of the genetic information are sadly lacking in Native American DNA, because people always say, well, can't you just get a DNA test and prove it? Apparently not. And I mean, the tribes probably wouldn't accept it anyway.
You and I, we keep finding out we've got these things in common, because I've recently tried to trace my ancestry as well, because I'll be perfectly honest, I was after an Irish passport.
Ooh.
Because I figured, it'd be nice to still have a European passport. And, so I looked at my relatives, my Irish relatives, and what's fascinating, because of the troubles in Ireland in the sort of the very early 1900s, they actually, one of the things they did during the troubles was burnt down the Public Records Office.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. So if you're going past the early 1900s, you've literally got to find gravestones in tiny little churches in the villages to be able to trace your ancestry.
Oh, my goodness. My dad comes from, I think it's Scottish, not Irish. And he was big into genealogy and tracing things back. And when I was going through the records recently, we have lots of pictures of little gravestones in little churches way back in nowhere. So it's really interesting, because my dad's last name was White. And so he can trace his genealogy, our genealogy, all the way back to Scotland as well, which is interesting. But yeah, you can't, on Facebook, you can buy a little acre of land or something and become a lord.
Yeah, you can give yourself some sort of title, be a laird of Strathclyde for having, a small square of land there, right? So
doesn't lady have a nice ring to it?
In a square of land in a Scottish distillery, because I bought a bottle of whiskey, and apparently if you go and visit, they'll take you and show you your little square of land, but I'm sure it's the same one they show to everybody.
I like that. I like that a lot. So if we're on genetics, let's move to the next little step on facial recognition, because there's a lot of issues in facial recognition that comes to heritage and genetics and appearance and everything.
There is. And I think over the last few days, we've seen a plethora of reports. We've seen the Canadian investigation into Clearview AI that was fairly damning of its use in law enforcement. I think their point was it's unreasonable for an individual to have to be in a permanent police lineup, is essentially having had no wrongdoing of their own. And I think that's a really good analogy. But I've been seeing a lot more. We're then seeing the Council of Europe guidance that came out recently that really was quite strict. It kind of said, facial recognition has got its benefits, but, we shouldn't be seeing, and we can see how it might be useful for law enforcement, but, targeted and justified. But, we shouldn't see it for commercial reasons in shopping centres,
Right.
We shouldn't see it, we shouldn't see private entities doing it just to, scam their employees. We've seen the rise of facial recognitions in airports to get in and out of your planes. And, what's always sexy and new now is tomorrow the new normal,
Right.
And the way I kind of consider it is when I think about my grandparents, they kept their money underneath their mattress, quite literally. They didn't trust bank accounts. And
my stepdad's the same way now.
Yeah. And then direct debits came out, and then, sort of itemized billing, and then paperless billing. And now if you don't want to pay by direct debit, or if you don't want to have a credit card, or if you don't want to have a mobile phone, or if you just can't interact with society anymore,
right.
or they start to charge you more for wanting a paper statement.
Oh, exactly.
So what we accept as a convenient solution today, or a sexy new thing, becomes the mandate of tomorrow. I was on a panel way back in 2001 that looked at something called ANPR, automatic number plate recognition. And that was supposed to be around the City of London for anti-terrorism purposes. And it's now on every petrol station, forecourt and parking garage in the country.
Right.
So, we have to be careful when we open Pandora's box. It cannot be closed again.
Well,
and
that's true. And here in the United States, I think San Francisco deployed facial recognition and then pulled it back.
Yes.
And so we've seen a lot of opportunities here where it's been deployed, and then people realize that the algorithms that the facial recognition are built on, probably not built on the best data.
Yeah, here's where we start to talk about data ethics and think about bias. And one of my clients, they do fingerprint recognition to distribute aid in difficult places in the world, places like Afghanistan or Rwanda. And they basically have got a fingerprint device attached to a mobile phone. And the reason why they were successful is they were actually a load of Cambridge University students. And the reason why they were successful is they worked out that all fingerprint software had been designed on Western white fingerprints. And if they took it to an area where, you worked harder manually and your fingerprints were more broken, or you were a different ethnicity, the false positive rate skyrocketed. So their real innovation, if you like, was simply to collect a wider and more diverse sample size to train the fingerprint software that they attach to the mobile phone, the fingerprint readers they attach to the mobile phone. And they use that to make sure.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we discussed with the data engineering session, our season episode that we did last season, on how it's along the lines of garbage in, garbage out. But when you're an engineer developing these technologies, you're not thinking about the wide range that might be possible, that if you only train the system on a certain set of data, you might very well be missing critical elements in other sets of data. And of course, here in the United States, we're pretty limited in a lot of the data sets that go in. And one of the examples that we had brought up, and I don't want to distract us from facial recognition, was about what's the likelihood of someone going to prison and that AI kind of algorithm. But if you're only basing it on the people that are in prison, well, there is a huge discrepancy in the populations that go to prison and those that don't, based on whatever reasons there are out there, valid or not.
Yeah.
The truth is there is a hugely different population in prison as compared to the ratio of the populations in the world, even in the country. And so garbage in, garbage out. If you're not training it with the right data, you're not going to have the right algorithm.
And then there's the people who don't fit the mold, the non-standard, the people whose face, for whatever reason, might be non-standard. And I hate to use that term, but, essentially, an individual who may have suffered some sort of facial disfigurement or, they don't fit the mold, and therefore this technology cannot or will not apply to them, and they end up being discriminated against for that sort of reason, let alone talking about ethnicity or anything like that. So, and then, once you've got that data, it then becomes quite easy to target certain groups based on certain criteria, or, we've seen it on even things like Google searches. I mean, if people search for, a white individual, you can just put in some very easy Google searches, white man, black woman, whatever you want to put in, and just see the sorts of results you get back. And the white man, you get, people in suits, or white hands and black hands was the one I think the research was done on, where white hands were all shaking hands in business, but black hands were all like looking up in help, or supplication, or do you know what I mean? It was so.
Yeah, I saw that story really when it came out. So we'll make sure that we find it and post that. But that was really interesting to consider, that this is what's driving our perceptions in society. And we can we should try to change perceptions in society, but we have a lot of work ahead of us to get the right data out there in the right hands. But then we have privacy concerns about not wanting to share data.
And transparency concerns as well. One of the biggest problems we found with all these artificial intelligence companies is not just the amount of data they're getting, it's how they're getting it. They're scraping it from what they call public sources. Now, this might be a US-EU divide, but in US, I think the historical position is, if it's available on the internet, tough luck, someone's made it public, we can take it. In the UK and the EU, the position is slightly different of, just because you can find it doesn't mean you can use it. You need to have a legal basis. You need to be transparent. You need to be telling people that you are collecting their data. Now,
that's the interesting thing. You can put in your privacy notice that we will acquire all publicly available information we can, including what's available online free. However, that's not the notice people need. People need the notice when they provide that data that can be scraped up. And how do you Yeah. How do you go back and do that? Because
it's difficult.
That's the interesting part. And I've started hearing the terminology zero person data. There's first person data, third or party, zero party data, first party data, third party data. Now there's zero party data, which is.
Well, this is where facial recognition becomes quite interesting to me because, we talk about a lot about, well, it's okay to get the data as long as it's anonymized or pseudonymized. Anonymizing someone's face.
How?
Yeah, exactly. Now, I think what's interesting is you look at some of the solutions that technology companies use, especially the security features on things like a mobile phone, a fruit-based mobile phone, shall we say. They've come up with some quite interesting ones in that when you put your fingerprint to the fingerprint reader, when you look at the phone and the camera scans your face in order to open it, they don't actually store a picture of your face.
Right. They store the points.
Yeah, and what they do is they then almost crunch that down into like a very short token, if you like.
Right.
But you actually lose data during that crunch. So even though you've got a unique reference, if you like, you've divorced it from the real world image that it was generated from. And then all they do is the next time you look at your phone, they take that same picture, they crunch it down, and they look to see if those two tokens match.
Right.
It's
which
not really
degrades,
an image match.
Which degrades the high quality possibility, but it upgrades the privacy component of it, which is really interesting.
So my question is, with facial recognition, do we need the faces? Do we need the pictures?
Right.
Or do we need it to be a mathematical representation of those faces, a tokenization of those faces? Could we divorce it from the real world? I was involved in the London Underground here in London, the Tube, when they did a Wi-Fi tracking trial. They were taking people's mobile phone signals and seeing where they hit Wi-Fi routers, because they knew when people went in and out of the underground, but you could have taken any route in between and they had no way of tracking you. So what they were doing to try and establish traffic flows, they weren't really interested in the person, they were interested in the traffic flow. They were, you can find the DPAA online, and it's done with a tool that you might recognize. That they've done the DPAA online, and that DPAA online, one of the things they did again was tokenize. They took the mobile phone data, they divorced it, they ran it through an algorithm and an encryption algorithm that produced a unique reference number, but divorced it from what was in the real world. So they could hit wherever that mobile phone hit, they could still track it was the same mobile phone, but divorce it from the MAC address and the stuff the device was actually giving off in the first place. So they got their tracking data, but again, they'd sort of reduced the risk by disassociating it with the individual.
Well, let me throw a scenario at you. Well, what if you lost I don't know of any other way to say it, the scan of people's teeth?
Right. Okay.
So what if you lost that? Are you jeopardizing privacy? Well, there's no name associated. There's no anything associated with it. I'm like, what's the risk? And they're like, well, it's health information. It's very personal. People can identify deceased individuals by their
dental records. Yeah.
I said, absolutely. But that means that they have that information already. Somehow or another, they're taking what they're finding and they're identifying based on information they have. So if we lose the scan of someone's teeth, yes, that's very personal, but it's not helpful to anyone unless they already have that record to compare it to know who it is.
So privacy is risk-based. We've always known privacy is risk-based, or data protection in my world is risk-based. And yes, you're right. You've always got to say, what's the risk? This is why we do privacy by design. This is why we do DPAAs, to try and get to that privacy by design standpoint where we're always looking at risk to the individual.
Right. And it has to be on a practical level. And I get it. I'm very much a privacy advocate. But there has to be that practicality based in with it, because there's a balance. There has to be a balance between it. And it has to be a balance to people, not in favor of commercial enterprise.
I would agree. And again, different starting points, EU, US. The EU fundamental right to privacy available to the lowest common denominator. I look at something like the App Store, which is like a US model that says, well, you can have an app for free and you get marketed to and surveilled, or you can pay for the app and the marketing and the advertising goes away. Now, that, to me, that's actually almost even something as simple as that. The App Store is at odds with privacy for all. That's privacy for the rich.
And that is true, because a lot of people I know that switched to a different form of social media recently came back because the form they switched to had a subscription fee. And so they came back to the popular social media because it was free. And that really does bring that message of it's privacy for the rich. It's for what you can pay for. And you don't have to be rich, but I mean, there are certain elements of privacy that should be widely available that aren't because they come at a premium.
Yeah, and I have a problem with quite a lot of privacy professionals in the US that are sort of starting off these own your own data campaigns, these monetize your own data, have a data broker who will allow you to sell your data. These commercial companies put a value on it. Why can't we get paid for the use of our data? I understand it, but again, you'll have people selling the poorer, selling their data as a commodity because they're disadvantaged, and the richer who will be able to invest in the protection of it. So that commercial
unintended consequences.
That commercial model will lead you down a dark road where you end up segregating society into the have and have nots based on their financial capability to protect their data or to earn money from it, depending on which side of the divide they sit on. And this is where algorithms then take it to the next level. When you get a global company with millions and millions and millions of data, they can turn around and say, look, the algorithm is 99.9999999% accurate. Isn't that wonderful? It's not so wonderful for the thousands of people who are the 0.0000001.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's not so good for the individual. Yeah. So when you get to algorithmic discrimination at a large scale with huge tech companies, what they consider to be a finite error rate in engineering terms that is a real success for them is still a disadvantage for huge groups and numbers of people. And I think that's sometimes forgotten.
I agree. And I think that's a good note for us to stop on because one, we're trying to make the episodes a little shorter because we've heard people are like, I don't want to run for 50 minutes. I only want to run for 35. So that doesn't compute with me. So we are trying to be very responsive to our fans. So I'm going to bring us to a close with that. And I do not do as good of a job as Paul does. Thank you for listening to our episode of Serious Privacy. If you like our series, please tell your friends and colleagues about us. Please make sure to also rate and review us, only if you love us, in your favorite podcast app. Should you have any questions, suggestions, fan comments, I love the compliments and the comments that we get in from our fans. Or if you want to be a guest, please reach out to us via seriousprivacy@trustarc.com or on Twitter at Podcast Privacy. You will find me on Twitter as Heart of Privacy, and you'll find Paul at EuroPaulB. You can also find us on LinkedIn. You can find TrustArc on LinkedIn or Twitter. You can find Ralph at...
You'll find me on Twitter at IGR O'Brien.
Nice. And we cannot thank y'all enough for being fans, for making our podcast popular. We're glad we're giving you what you want, and we look forward to bringing a lot more to you. So I think Paul usually signs off with bye for now, but that's not me. So I'm just going to say bye, y'all.
And let me sign off as well by just saying a big, big thank you to Kay and Paul for inviting me on as co-host. And I'm sure I'm a poor replacement for Paul, and I'm sure he'll be back in your ears very, very soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Oh my goodness, listen at that. Thank you, Ralph. Bye, y'all.
That was Serious Privacy.
If you're a data protection or privacy professional, you already know the pressure. Non-stop regulatory change, AI oversight, internal demands, and the expectation to somehow stay ahead of it all. And the old patchwork of tools just isn't cutting it anymore.
No. That's why TrustArc created a modern privacy management platform powered by Arc Intelligence. The TrustArc platform brings your workflows, evidence, research, tasks, and applications all together in one unified and intelligent workspace so you don't waste time digging, clicking, or context switching.
With Ask Arc, your privacy assistant, you can ask plain language questions about laws, jurisdictions, or even your own program data and get credible, cited answers based on NIMBY research and more than 1,000 global laws. It's explainable, transparent, and purpose-built for data protection and privacy.
So if you need to add a vendor, create a cookie banner, or start an assessment, quick actions take formally complex tasks, turn them into bite-sized guided workflows to save you time.
It's a platform that thinks like you, works like you, and helps you move faster with confidence, whether you're a seasoned DPO or you're just getting started.
See how modern privacy gets done. Explore Arc at trustarc.com/serious-privacy. That's trustarc.com/serious-privacy.